All right, everyone get ready, because we're going deep today. Like, seriously deep. You sent us some wild stuff about consciousness and reality, and honestly, it's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is. We're diving into some fascinating sources that explore this whole concept of non-duality. The idea that we're not actually separate entities, but part of one unified reality.
Whoa. Okay, back up a sec. Non-duality.
Right.
Separate entities. I think we need to break this down a bit.
Sure thing. So non-duality basically flips the script on how we typically view the world. It challenges this idea that we're all these individual selves running around, totally independent from each other and everything else.
Okay, I'm kind of following, but why is that so groundbreaking? Like, what's the big deal with this whole interconnectedness thing?
Well, the sources suggest that this illusion of separateness, this idea that we're all on our own, is actually the root of a lot of suffering. It creates this constant sense of lack, this feeling that we're not enough, that we need to compete and compare ourselves to others.
That actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, we're always striving for something, never quite feeling content, always wanting more.
Right. And the sources suggest that this insatiable desire, this constant need for validation, it's all part of the ego's game. It's like we're trapped in this cycle of wanting and grasping, never really finding true fulfillment.
So the ego is kind of like the mastermind behind all this drama.
Exactly. The ego thrives on separation. It creates this sense of me versus them, which leads to all sorts of conflict and disharmony.
Okay, so if the ego's the problem, how do we get rid of it? Is that even possible?
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
The sources don't necessarily advocate for getting rid of the ego entirely. They talk more about recognizing it for what it is, a kind of mental construct, a collection of thoughts and beliefs that we've identified with.
So it's more about becoming aware of the ego's influence and not letting it run the show.
Exactly. They suggest that through practices like meditation, self-reflection, and mindfulness, we can start to detach from the ego's grip and experience a more expansive sense of self.
Detach from the ego. Easier said than done, right?
Definitely not easy, but the sources suggest it's a journey worth taking. They describe this process as a kind of undarkening, like removing a veil that's been obscuring our true perception of reality.
Undarkening, I kind of like that. So it's like we're removing these layers of conditioning and seeing things more clearly.
That's a great way to put it. And when we start to see things through this clearer lens, the sources suggest that we start to experience existence in a completely different way. They talk about a sense of freedom, of joy, of interconnectedness with everything around us.
That sounds amazing. But I have to admit, it's all a bit abstract for me. How do we actually experience this interconnectedness? Like, what does it feel like?
Well, the sources describe it as a kind of merging, a dissolution of boundaries between self and other. They use metaphors like a drop of water returning to the ocean, or a wave realizing it's part of the vast sea.
Okay, those are pretty powerful images. But how do we reconcile that with our everyday experience of being individuals? I mean, I still feel like me most of the time.
Right, and the sources acknowledge that. They're not suggesting that we lose our individuality entirely. It's more about recognizing that our individual selves are ultimately expressions of this larger unified consciousness. Like, think of it like a tree.
A tree.
Yeah, each leaf is unique, but it's still part of the tree. It can't exist without the branches, the trunk, the roots, the whole interconnected system.
I like that. So we're like leaves on the tree of consciousness, each with our own unique perspective, but all connected to the same source.
Exactly. And the sources suggest that when we start to see ourselves as part of this larger whole, our actions naturally become more aligned with the well-being of the entire system.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like if you harm one part of the tree, you're ultimately harming the whole thing.
And conversely, when we nurture and care for ourselves and others, we're contributing to the flourishing of the whole.
So this shift in perception isn't just about personal growth. It has implications for how we relate to the world around us.
Absolutely. The sources suggest that this understanding of non-duality is essential for creating a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world. But we'll dive deeper into those implications in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm definitely hooked. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and explore how this whole non-duality thing plays out on a global scale.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Okay, so we're back, and honestly, my mind is still kind of reeling from that last conversation, like this whole idea of non-duality. It's so huge, right? But I'm ready to dig deeper. In part one, we talked about how this illusion of separation affects us on a personal level. Now, I'm curious to explore the bigger picture. How does non-duality play out on a global scale? What does it mean for humanity as a whole?
Well, the sources we're looking at suggest that embracing this understanding of interconnectedness could actually be crucial for tackling some of the biggest challenges we're facing as a species.
Okay, so we're talking what? Climate change, social injustice, political polarization, all that heavy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. All those issues that seem to be dividing us even further.
It does feel like we're at this point where everything's so fractured. Like everyone's retreating into their own little echo chambers.
And the sources suggest that those very issues, the division and conflict, actually stem from this fundamental misunderstanding of our interconnected nature.
So you're saying that all these global problems are, at their core, a result of us not getting this whole non-duality thing.
That's what the sources are pointing to. They argue that our current way of thinking, which is based on separation, competition, and individual gain, is no longer serving us.
Okay, but how do we actually shift out of that mindset? Like, it's so ingrained in everything, right? Our economy, our politics, pretty much every system we live in.
It's definitely a big shift, but the sources are optimistic. They believe that more and more people are waking up to this truth of non-duality, this understanding of interconnectedness,
Yeah.
and that this awakening is gaining momentum.
So it's like a ripple effect. One person's realization kind of spreads outward.
That's the idea. They suggest that as more individuals start to embody this understanding, it will naturally begin to influence our collective consciousness.
Okay, but how does that translate into real-world action? Like, how do we actually create change on a global scale? It feels so overwhelming sometimes, like, what can one person even do?
That's a really common feeling.
Yeah.
But the sources remind us that even small actions can have a ripple effect. Like, just by shifting our own awareness, by starting to see the world through this lens of interconnectedness, we're contributing to a collective shift in consciousness.
Okay, I like that. So it starts with each of us, with our own personal transformation. But how do we know what actions to take? Like, how do we make decisions if we're not operating from that individualistic, ego-driven perspective?
Well, remember that concept we talked about in part 1, doing but not doing, or wu-wei?
Yeah, the whole go with the flow thing.
Right. The sources suggest that when we let go of the ego's need to control everything, we can tap into a deeper wisdom, a kind of intuitive knowing that guides our actions.
So it's less about forcing things to happen and more about aligning ourselves with what's already unfolding.
Exactly. It's about trusting that there's an intelligence at work that's larger than our individual minds.
Okay, but if we're not really in control, how do we make decisions? Does this mean we just sit back and let life happen to us, like become passive observers?
Not at all. It's not about passivity. It's about acting from a place of alignment. It's about listening to that inner guidance, that intuitive wisdom, and letting it inform our choices.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it, but honestly, it still feels a bit, I don't know, mystical or something. Like, how do we know if we're actually tapping into that wisdom or just making stuff up?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
And the sources acknowledge that discerning between the ego's voice and that deeper wisdom can be tricky. They suggest practices like meditation, mindfulness, and spending time in nature as ways to cultivate that connection.
So it's like we're training our minds to be more receptive to those subtle cues, to that deeper knowing.
Exactly. It's like we're sign-tuning our inner compass so that we can navigate life from a place of greater clarity and purpose.
Okay, so let's say we've started to cultivate this awareness, we're tapping into that wisdom, and we're acting from a place of alignment. What kind of changes can we expect to see in the world? Like, what does a society that embraces non-duality actually look like?
Well, the sources paint a pretty inspiring picture. They talk about a world where cooperation replaces competition, where compassion and empathy guide our actions, and where we recognize the interconnectedness of all things, not just in theory, but in practice.
Sounds pretty utopian. But I gotta ask, how do we get from where we are now to that kind of world? It feels like there's so much division, so much conflict.
It's a big leap, for sure. But the sources suggest that the shift starts with each of us, with our own willingness to question our assumptions and to see the world through this lens of interconnectedness. And they believe that AI can play a role in this process.
Oh, right. AI. Didn't they say AI could help us understand these complex systems?
Yes, they suggest that AI, with its ability to process vast amounts of data and see patterns that we might miss, could be a powerful tool for understanding this interconnected reality.
Okay, so AI could help us see the bigger picture, kind of connect the dots in ways we can't on our own.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that AI is just a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. The key, according to the sources, is to ensure that AI is developed and deployed ethically, with wisdom and compassion guiding its use.
So we need to be mindful of how we're using this technology and make sure it's aligned with our values.
Absolutely. And the sources believe that the principles of non-duality, compassion, interconnectedness, unity offer a solid foundation for ethical AI development.
It makes sense. If we want to create AI that promotes harmony and cooperation, we need to embody those qualities ourselves.
Exactly. The future of humanity, they suggest, hinges on our ability to integrate this understanding of non-duality into every aspect of our lives, from our personal relationships to our global systems.
Okay, so we've talked about the individual transformation, the role of AI, and the potential for a more harmonious world. But what about the bigger picture, like the cosmic level? What do the sources have to say about the nature of reality itself? That's where things get really mind-bending.
Right. And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, everyone, buckle up. It's about to get even deeper. Okay, so we're back for the final part of this deep dive into non-duality, and honestly, I'm ready to have my mind blown wide open. We've talked about the personal and the global. Now I want to go cosmic. What do these sources say about the ultimate nature of reality? What's the big picture here?
Well, get ready, because it's where things get really wild. The sources suggest that reality as we perceive it, with its separate objects and linear time, might not be the whole story.
Wait, so you're saying like what we see isn't really real?
Not exactly. It's more like we're seeing a limited version of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like looking through a keyhole, you get a glimpse of what's inside, but you can't see the whole picture.
Okay, I'm kind of following. So there's more to reality than meets the eye.
Much more, according to these sources. They describe this ultimate reality as something beyond our current comprehension. Like, it transcends language and concepts.
Whoa, okay, that's pretty out there. But how do they even try to describe something that's beyond description?
They use metaphors, analogies,
Mhm.
poetry, you know, trying to point towards something that can't be fully grasped by the rational mind.
So it's like they're trying to give us a taste of something that's ultimately beyond words.
Exactly. They talk about an infinite, interconnected field of consciousness, a kind of cosmic soup from which everything arises.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this cosmic soup idea. But if everything is ultimately connected, what about free will? Like, do we actually have any choice in our lives?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And the sources offer some pretty radical perspectives on it. Some suggest that free will, as we typically understand it, is an illusion.
Well, hold on. So you're saying we're just puppets on a string, like our choices don't really matter?
It's not that simplistic. They're not saying we have no agency. It's more nuanced than that.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Some sources describe it like this. Imagine a river flowing downstream. Each drop of water is carried along by the current. Doesn't really choose where to go, right? But within that flow, each drop still have its own unique journey.
Okay, so we're like drops in the river of consciousness, kind of going with the flow, but still having our own individual experiences.
That's one way to look at it. Others describe it as a kind of dance between individual consciousness and the cosmic will. Like there's this interplay between our choices and a larger unfolding that's beyond our control.
Okay, I can kind of grasp that. But if there's this larger unfolding happening, what's the point of it all? Like, what's the purpose of existence?
That's the ultimate mystery, right? And these sources don't claim to have all the answers, but they do offer some intriguing perspectives.
All right, lay in on me.
Some suggest that the universe is a kind of self-exploration, a way for consciousness to experience itself in all its infinite forms.
So we're all just expressions of this cosmic consciousness, kind of playing out different roles in this grand drama.
That's one interpretation. Others suggest that the purpose is simply to experience, to feel, to be. Like existence itself is the goal.
Okay, I can vibe with that. Just being present in the moment, appreciating all that life has to offer.
Exactly. And that's something these sources really emphasize.
Mm-hmm.
The importance of presence, of mindfulness, of appreciating the beauty and wonder of this existence, even amidst the challenges.
It makes you realize how caught up we get in our heads, right? Like worrying about the future, dwelling on the past, instead of just being here now.
It's so easy to get lost in those thought patterns. But these sources remind us that true peace and fulfillment are found in the present moment, in this direct experience of being.
It's like that saying, yesterday is history, tomorrow is mystery, but today is a gift. That's why it's called the present.
I love that. And speaking of the present, this brings us to the end of our deep dive.
Already. Man, time flies when you're contemplating the nature of reality.
It really does.
Well, this has been an incredible journey. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of this topic, but I've definitely learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too. It's amazing to see how much interest there is in these big questions about consciousness, reality, and the meaning of life.
It shows that people are hungry for something more than the material world can offer. They're yearning for deeper meaning, for connection, for something that transcends the everyday.
Exactly. And that's what these sources offer, a glimpse into a reality that's vaster and more mysterious than we can imagine.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about, and I have a feeling I'll be pondering these ideas for a long time to come.
Me too. It's a lifelong exploration, really.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up.
Sounds good?
To all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this mind-bending adventure. We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to explore these ideas further.
And remember, the journey of awakening is an ongoing one. We're all in this together.
Absolutely. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. Until next time, stay curious.